For more on the tit-for-tat threats between the U.S. and Iran, we are joined by Alex Vatanka. He's a senior fellow at the Middle East Institute. Thank you so much for joining us, Alex. So with the clock ticking down on that 48-hour deadline, just how serious is Mr. Trump's warning? And is this escalate to de-escalate strategy actually going to work in a conflict like this?
It's great to be with you. Look, I mean, the president has made remarks such as this before in other contexts, for example, in the Gaza conflict. It remains to be seen if he is serious to go through with what he promised to do, which is to destroy all Iran's power generation capacity, which obviously is a major step. Many consider that sort of action to essentially be tantamount to war crime. He's got some pushback here in the United States. On the other hand, we've heard from the Iranian foreign minister in the last 24 hours or so saying the strait isn't closed. Those ships that are deciding not to sail through the strait do so because of the conditions of war. And the Iranian foreign minister points out, we didn't start this war. So talk to the Americans and talk to the Israelis who did attack Iran. So we're now in this middle of game of words, essentially. But I think, obviously President Trump wants to put the pressure on the Iranians. He might walk away from this ultimatum of 48 hours and hitting Iran's power generation capacity, but fundamentally hasn't made up his mind in terms of what he wants to see from the Iranian side in terms of concessions, so he can call it a day and say he's declare victory and move on.
Alex, the rhetoric aside, the back and forth aside, are there any signs that Iran is taking steps to comply within this 48-hour deadline? I mean, what are your contacts telling you?
Yeah, no, I haven't seen anything to suggest to me that they're changing their strategy. I mean, their strategy seems to be the same as it has been for the last 4 weeks or so, which is to essentially try and increase the pain, the economic pain, not just on the Gulf states, but on the global economy at large, in the hope, and this is Tehran's hope, to put pressure on the United States, obviously in particular, to end this war. So the Iranians have put their number of ideas on the table in terms of how a ceasefire could look like. Whether that's realistic or not to be debated, but the fact is they are open to some kind of a political dialogue. But in the meantime, I think they feel that they have their upper hand. They feel like they have surprised everyone by the way they've been able to essentially take the global economy hostage. Might be an exaggeration, but certainly everywhere around the world now there is a war going on in Iran, and that's good enough for the Iranians to make the point that if this war continues, Iran is not going to be the only country paying the consequences. Others will as well.
Alex, I don't know how closely you follow NATO, but I want to ask you about the comments that were made by the chief, Mark Rutte. He said basically the alliance will be able to reopen the waterway if Iran does close it indefinitely. I mean, does it sound to you like NATO is perhaps preparing to enter the fray?
Well, that could happen. Obviously, President Trump is very upset. He doesn't feel the NATO countries are doing their part as partners. When the United States has been knocking on their door, they have basically so far refused to listen to him. There is no sign that Europeans, what is the British, the Germans, others are willing to send forces to Strait of Hormuz to open it up, if you will. And, the head of NATO, Mark Rutte, he is someone who we know in terms of his track record. He's very sensitive to the sort of feelings of Donald Trump, the man. So he speaks to audience of one. He wants to reassure Donald Trump that at least the head of NATO is on his side. But whether the head of NATO can convince the Europeans to come on board, that's a different matter. Because I think Europeans fundamentally have not been able to convince themselves that this is a war they should take part in, because they don't fundamentally know where this is going. One thing is limited tactical in terms of opening the Strait of Hormuz. Another thing is, well, you might have to end up changing the political system in Iran. You have to occupy Iran. Who's going to do that? Are the Europeans going to be asked to send troops to a country the size of Iran? I mean, those are the types of concerns that are keeping the Europeans sort of on the fence on this issue, at least for now.
And Mr. Rutte also said it's still assessing Iran missile type in Diego Garcia strike. Of course, I'm referring to the report that Iran attempted to strike the U.S. base there, raising concerns its missiles could, in theory, reach parts of Europe. Alex, just how real is that threat?
Well, it could be a real threat. I mean, one is capability, and they have proven now. I mean, if I remember my math right, Diego Garcia is just under 4,000 kilometers away from Iran. So it's certainly way over what the Iranians had said to us in terms of their missile range. A significant part of Europe will be within reach of these missiles. So the capacity is there by the looks of it. The question is one of intent then. And again, if you're sitting in Europe, and particularly if they take part in this war against the Iranians, they will consider Europe, presumably from their point of view, fair game, because the Europeans are part of the war against them. So why would they, again, from their point of view, why would they not want to involve Europe? I don't know how many of those missiles they have, what impact that will have. And obviously, I'm speaking purely in hypotheticals here. And I don't think the Iranians want to go near such a scenario of attacking European continent with their missiles. They're hoping for acting crazy, if you will, if that makes sense, to sort of go out there and show that you have no brakes anymore, that you're willing to escalate. But again, not because they're on some sort of a suicide mission, just because they want to get everyone's attention to put pressure on that one individual in the White House, Donald Trump, to have him essentially end this war. I think that's what the Iranians are calculating to achieve, if they can achieve it.
Okay, Alex, this no brakes approach apparently includes civilian infrastructure now being used by Israel and American allies, which includes all the GCC countries. So I guess the question is, how serious is this going to be, for the region? I mean, if vital energy and water facilities are indeed attacked, and is there a plan B for water and power for the regional countries in the region?
That's a really important question to ask. And it's, essentially in that context, these are very dark times. Some of these countries have more water supplies than others. Iran, for example, has most of its water supply come from natural sources. But the Gulf countries, for example, even Israel, they rely heavily on desalination plants. If those plants become targets as part of this war, then yes, water security, which has been a concern for years in this part of the world, will become so much more of a concern. These are also happen to be wealthy countries. They can, I'm sure, import water in the short term to for their societies to be able to continue, but that's not going to be a long-term solution. So, I totally understand why there is such a concern about this war entering into civilian infrastructure being hit. It's definitely a very dark scenario to contemplate. I hope we don't go there, but we've also seen both parties. The Israelis hit some sites in Iran. Iran retaliated. This is not a good place to be. This is a slippery slope. And I hope wiser heads will prevail, and they will, limit themselves to targeting military assets to the extent possible and not civilian infrastructure. Because to your point, if this continues, it will make good part of the Middle East not livable for a long time. And they will be distracted from economic development and post-oil plans that they had to going back to the basics, trying to bring back water and electricity supplies, which is something they did decades ago. They had not anticipated this would be a concern of them at this point, and yet here we are discussing it.
Yeah, and Alex, just your thoughts on Washington's overall strategy. We heard from Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. He outlined very ambitious goals, from destroying Iran's military capabilities to preventing it from rearming. Just how close is the U.S. to achieving that, especially when Iran is still able to launch attacks after weeks of strikes?
Yeah, so, it really goes back to that basic question. What does success look like? And, sometimes we hear the president say success has already been achieved, that Iran is so weak now, it's 5-10 years behind where it was before, so he can walk away. Other times he speaks of capitulation, surrender. Other members of his cabinet talk about, making sure Iran doesn't have an industrial capacity going forward to produce things like ballistic missiles. So we haven't heard a consistent message. Therefore, it's really difficult to judge what success could look like, although success could be declared at any moment by the president himself, because he could single-handedly decide what success is or can look like. But if we're just sort of going down the path of Iran not having any capacity in any way to threaten with drones and missiles in years to come, then there's only really one solution for that, which is you entirely remove the Islamic Republic from the political map, which means you have to go into that country by force. You have to occupy it. You have to kill every single member of that regime that's willing to fight for it. That's a long-term project. That's nation building that Donald Trump said he wouldn't engage in. And it would be nation building 3-4 times bigger than what the United States tried to do in Iraq some 20 years ago. So again, that's what some people are saying he should do here in Washington, but I don't think they're in a majority as of yet. I think the majority of his advisors are warning him about the economic consequences of an open-ended war with Iran and are telling him he should look for off-ramp and get the country out of this war as soon as he can.
All right. Understood, Alex. We have to leave it there for now. Appreciate you, sharing your thoughts with us this morning. Alex Vatanka is Senior Fellow at the Middle East Institute.